Hello and welcome. My name is Jeremy Binney and I'm the Middle East editor for Jane's Defence Weekly. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this online intelligence briefing examining chemical weapons use in Syria. The Jane's Intelligence Briefing Programme will consist of approximately 40 events during 2018 and is available to all customers of Jane's Intelligence Centre and Module products, including the Markets Forecast products. Today, I'm joined by Carl Dewey, our CBRN analyst, who will give us a quick overview of the historical accusations of chemical weapons use in Syria and then some thoughts on the recent chemical attack on Douma. After that, we will be joined by Rod Godfrey, a chemical weapons expert who served as an inspector for the UN Specials Commission and the Iraq Survey Group, who will look at the international response to the continuing chemical weapon accusations and seek to answer the questions of what outcomes do we expect in Syria, and why are we concerned about CW in Syria? Finally, we will be joined by Alessandra Giovansanti, who will be looking at Syria's continuing efforts to procure dual-use technologies. Before we begin, I would like to highlight that the information used to compile today's presentation has been drawn from a variety of sources, but particularly IHS Markit Conflict Monitor and Jane CBRN Intelligence Centre. So without any further delay, Carl, our CBRN analyst, will take us through the first part of today's briefing.
Thank you, Jeremy. As we know, the Syrian conflict is now in its 6th year. Chemical weapons have featured prominently in the conflict and have been one of the few factors to start Western intervention. Whilst chemical weapons have been used at varying levels since 2012, they have again risen up the political agenda following the reported chemical attack on Douma on 7th of April and the subsequent airstrikes by Britain, France and the United States 6 days later. Before going into events leading up to Douma, a quick recap of previous observations might be useful. Firstly, the government has remained the principal actor accused of using chemical weapons. Although there have only been 4 confirmed uses of chemical weapons by the Syrian government, Jane's has logged approximately 300 reported attacks since Syria signed the Chemical Weapon Convention in late 2013. Similarly, the Syrian Archive, a non-governmental documentation centre, has documented 212 chemical attacks between 2012 and 2018. From this, 2 patterns are discernible. Firstly, the accusations suggest government forces use chemical weapons in support of Syrian army operations. This has developed over time and has seen increasing refinement. For example, greater coordination with ground forces and greater volumes of agents used. Secondly, the Syrian government uses chemicals as a tool of strategic punishment. This also resides along a spectrum. At one end, less lethal agents are used in part as a part of a general bombardment on rebel-held areas. Here, chemical weapons complement the government's siege warfare, what Amnesty International calls the surrender or starve strategy, wherein rebels are convinced to engage in negotiated surrender. Large attacks may also be used to break enemy will and expedite capitulation, as we likely saw in the Douma attack. They may also be used to punish and deter future military action, as seen in the largely retaliatory strike on Khan Shaykhun last year. Here, in 2017, IHS Markit Conflict Monitor reported 10 chemical attacks, all taking place in Syria between late June and July, all concentrated in eastern Ghouta. So, prior to the 2018 offensive, Operation Damascus Steel, this is what the pocket looked like. We can see eastern Ghouta on the right-hand scene in blue and the southern pocket in blue and black towards the south. As noted, Operation Damascus Shield began in February. After intermittent shelling of the pocket, on the 18th of February, the Syrian Arab Army began 8 consecutive days of bombardment with heavy artillery and airstrikes. A ground assault finally began on the 25th of February, with early gains being made in the southeast of the pocket, as indicated by the 2 arrows. The government continued its offensive and, although control of the pocket ebbed and flowed, by 4th of March, government forces had come close to bisecting the pocket. On 7th of March, the military captured Beit Sawa and Hash al-Ash'ari in the pocket centre. By 10th of March, the army seized Merazda effectively splitting eastern Ghouta into 3 sections. These were centred around Duma, Harista and Irvin Jobar, as seen on the slide.
I'm going to cover 3 separate areas. One is how an informed observer can judge whether or not a chemical weapons site is a factory or laboratory or not. Secondly, what it means for the regime in terms of the final process, the political process within Syria. And last of all, why we should be concerned about chemical weapons use in Syria. So on the left, it's claimed that this is a chemical laboratory, and we see in the top a fairly scruffy building. And underneath, 2 separate shots. One is a large white cylindrical apparatus, and on the right we have some beakers in a very muddy bench. We're not quite sure what's going on. Well, I can tell you that the thing on the left is a medical gas compressor. It's the sort of installation you would find in the basement of a hospital or a dentist's surgery, providing compressed air throughout the hospital. If you attempted to run anything corrosive through this, and that would include both chlorine and most nerve agents, the compressor would be broken beyond repair fairly quickly. And on the right, we're unable to say anything at all. We have some dirty beakers on a dirty bench. The Alawite regime will emerge as the strongest player, and that may or may not be with Bashar al-Assad in charge. But that means that the sanctions will remain unless there's a major change observed in the government of Syria. And Syria will continue its alignment with Russia and Iran. It's made its bargain over the past 3 or 4 years, and there's really no option for the Alawite regime to change. And to some extent, if you look at I now hand you over to Alessandra.
I will now briefly discuss the North Korean-Syria connection, drawing upon the latest UN panel of experts report released in March on North Korea's proliferation-related activities. The panel was appointed to monitor the observance of international sanctions imposed on Pyongyang and includes new evidence on the continuing North Korean trade of prohibited ballistic missile, conventional arms-related and dual-use goods towards several countries, among which Syria. The dual-use items described by the report have the potential to further Syria's chemical weapon and missile programs, which have continued in the background of the civil war, international sanctions, and Syria's accession to the Chemical Weapon Convention. The North Korean-Syrian cooperation is long-standing, and Pyongyang has been a key enabler of Syria's military advancements, particularly in the field of air defense, ballistic missile, and nuclear technology. In return, these activities have contributed to fund North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. Bilateral cooperation has its roots in the 1960s, when North Korea sent its forces to Syria to train and support the local armed forces.
So, in terms of the key takeaways from the combined presentations, I think we can summarise as follows. The chemical weapons use in Duma was part of a larger military campaign to clear the Damascene, greater Damascene area. And chemical weapons use in Duma in particular is consistent with previously observed patterns. The Russian claims that there are no chemical weapons found have been disputed, and we await the results of the fact-finding mission. Despite the presence of investigators, as what has mentioned, there's currently no mechanism for attributing the use of chemical weapons in Syria. Thus, it remains unclear what this report may achieve. Indeed, in terms of the wider context, as the Syrian government consolidates its control of the country, it's likely that the Alawite regime will maintain control of Syria. Whether or not peace talks take place remains to be seen, but there's no change in the domestic situation or indeed in the strategic situation. When the conflict finishes, Israel still is in possession of the Golan Heights, and the strategic situation about a Syrian strategic deterrence still remains. In light of this, we can see that there are still ongoing efforts to procure chemical weapons or dual-use technology which is relevant towards the production of chemical weapons, which is a clear violation of Syria's obligations under the CWC. Although they remain unconfirmed, these accusations include those that North Korea is facilitating Syria's chemical weapons program, if directly from the production to its use. And I think, as well, this highlights the impotence or potential impotence of the OPCW. As Rod mentioned, this was designed for state-on-state conflicts, but still the continuing use of chemical weapons and the indecisive response by the international community may both fail to deter use of chemical weapons or start redefining the norms.
We look forward to welcoming you to future online briefings. Our next online briefing, which is on social media intelligence and counter-terrorism case studies, will take place in a couple of weeks on 10th of May. So make sure you get signed up for that one, which promises to be an enlightening event. Thank you and goodbye.